The city of New York sparkled like a restless jewel in the late evening. Skyscrapers stretched high into the clouds, each floor lit like stars stacked one upon another. The sounds of honking taxis, rushing footsteps, and the distant hum of subways echoed beneath the skyline. In the heart of this bustling world of ambition and fortune, a man named Ethan Cole sat behind the tinted windows of a black Cadillac Escalade. From the outside, Ethan had everything. His name was printed in glossy magazines that celebrated America's most influential CEOs. His face occasionally appeared on financial news channels, where anchors praised his bold investments and ruthless efficiency. In corporate circles, people whispered his name with both awe and fear. To his employees, he was untouchable, a figure of power who commanded respect but rarely gave warmth. Tonight, Ethan was heading to an exclusive business gala at a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park. His driver, Michael Harris, maneuvered the SUV through Manhattan traffic with the patience of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Michael's eyes, steady and calm, flickered between the road and the rearview mirror. Ethan, however, barely looked up. He scrolled through his phone, firing off curt emails to his executives, his mind racing with numbers and deadlines. The contrast between the two men was stark. Ethan wore a tailored navy blue suit that cost more than Michael's monthly rent. His watch, a gleaming Rolex, reflected the car's dim lights. Beside him lay a leather briefcase, its polished surface carrying contracts worth millions. Michael, on the other hand, wore a simple driver's uniform. His hands were calloused, his knuckles slightly swollen from years of manual labor before he had found this job. His shoes were scuffed, though always clean, a silent testament to the pride he took in presenting himself properly, no matter the pay grade. Ethan glanced briefly toward the front. "Take Fifth Avenue." "I don't want to get stuck in midtown traffic," he instructed without emotion. "Yes, sir," Michael replied softly, adjusting the route. This was their relationship, transactional, professional, and distant. Michael knew every corner of the city, every shortcut, and every client of Ethan's. He had been driving him for almost 3 years now. He knew Ethan's moods, when silence was better than small talk, when to open a door quickly, when to vanish into the background. He was the kind of man whose work blended so seamlessly into the day that most people forgot he was even there. But invisibility came at a cost. As the Escalade passed by a homeless man huddled under a blanket near Columbus Circle, Michael's eyes lingered on the figure. Ethan didn't notice. He was absorbed in an article on his phone about a competitor's failing stock. To Ethan, the streets were simply obstacles between him and his next meeting. To Michael, every face carried a story, one that often reminded him of his own fragile existence. The gala that night was the kind of event that showcased the divide between America's wealthy elite and those who served them. Red carpets were rolled out, glasses of champagne sparkled under chandeliers, and the air buzzed with conversations about mergers, investments, and luxury vacations. Ethan stepped out of the car confidently, barely acknowledging Michael, who rushed to open the door. Photographers snapped pictures as if capturing royalty. Inside, people greeted Ethan with firm handshakes and admiring smiles. He was the star of the evening. Michael, meanwhile, parked the SUV a few blocks away and waited. The hours ticked by slowly. He sat quietly in the driver's seat, a paperback novel resting on the dashboard, though his mind wasn't really on the words. He thought about his daughter, Emily, back in New Jersey. She would be finishing her homework right now, her notebook spread across their worn kitchen table. The thought brought both pride and a pang of worry. He wondered if she had remembered to take her medicine. He wondered if the bills he had pushed aside could wait one more week. Back in the gala, Ethan laughed with other CEOs, sipping on fine whiskey. Yet even in the midst of admiration, something about his laughter felt hollow. He caught his reflection in the mirrored wall, sharp suit, perfect smile, but tired eyes. For a moment, he wondered if this was truly success or just a carefully constructed performance. Still, he brushed the thought away. Vulnerability was not a luxury a man like him could afford. By midnight, Ethan returned to the car, his steps brisk, his mood sharp. "Drive me home," he said, loosening his tie. "Yes, sir," Michael replied, starting the engine. The city lights blurred past the windows as the SUV glided down the avenues. Ethan leaned back, his mind already on tomorrow's board meeting. Michael stayed focused, hands steady on the wheel. Neither spoke. But the silence wasn't equal. For Ethan, silence was comfort, the world bending to his control. For Michael, silence was heavy, a reminder of the invisible barrier between two men who shared the same space but lived in two different universes. At one red light, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message: "Congratulations on tonight's speech, Ethan. Investors are impressed." He smirked faintly. He didn't notice Michael glance in the mirror at his faint smile. Nor did he see the exhaustion behind Michael's eyes, the lines of a man who carried more weight than his shoulders should bear. In that moment, their lives felt like parallel highways, running alongside each other but never touching. Ethan's road was paved with ambition, wealth, and recognition. Michael's road was filled with sacrifice, resilience, and silent struggles. And yet, neither of them knew how violently those roads would soon collide. The Escalade purred smoothly along the highway out of Manhattan, leaving behind the glittering towers that defined Ethan Cole's empire. Inside the driver's seat, Michael Harris kept his posture steady, his eyes fixed on the road, his hands steady at 10 and 2. To most, he was just a driver, another anonymous figure who made the wealthy world move effortlessly. To Ethan, he was even less, merely another cog in the machine of his success. But when Michael turned off the main highway toward a modest neighborhood in New Jersey, the stark difference between his world and Ethan's became painfully clear. Rows of small, aging houses lined the quiet streets. The lawns were patchy, some fenced with peeling paint, others lit only by dim porch bulbs. Here, there were no doormen, no marble lobbies, no valet services. Just working families trying to make ends meet. Michael parked the SUV outside his own small rental home, a weather-beaten two-story with creaking steps and a screen door that squeaked when opened. He shut off the engine, waited a beat, and sighed softly. His shoulders slumped, as though the mask of calm professionalism he wore in front of Ethan finally cracked once the tinted windows were between them. Inside, the warmth of home greeted him. His daughter, Emily, sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by open notebooks, her curly hair tied back loosely. She looked up as soon as he walked in, her eyes lighting up. "Dad, you're home." Michael's tired face softened into a smile. "Hey, kiddo. How's the homework battle tonight?" Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "Math's winning. But I'll catch up." Michael chuckled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's my girl." The kitchen told its own story. The refrigerator was covered with Emily's drawings and school achievement certificates, faded but cherished. A calendar on the wall had circled dates, doctor's appointments, payment deadlines, reminders written in Michael's neat handwriting. The pantry shelves were half empty. A stack of unopened bills sat near the microwave, the envelopes marked in red. Yet the room carried a sense of resilience. There was love here, even if money was scarce. After reheating leftover macaroni and cheese, Michael sat across from Emily. He studied her carefully, noting the slight pallor of her skin and the way she rubbed her arm absent-mindedly. Emily had been diagnosed with a chronic illness 2 years ago, one that required constant medication and regular hospital visits. Insurance covered part of it, but not nearly enough. Michael worked every extra hour he could, yet the cost always outran his earnings. Still, he never let Emily see the full weight of it. She deserved a normal teenage life, school dances, football games, laughter with friends. Not nights filled with worry over whether her dad could pay the next hospital bill. "How was your day?" Emily asked between bites. Michael hesitated, thinking about the hours spent in silence, driving a man who didn't even bother to say thank you. But he forced a smile. "Busy. Lots of traffic. You know how the city is." She nodded. One day, I'll see the city too. I want to visit the museums, maybe go to a Broadway show. Michael's chest ached at her innocence. He wanted nothing more than to give her that world. He glanced at the bills stacked nearby, then back at her hopeful eyes. And you will, sweetheart. I promise. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Michael sat alone at the kitchen table. He opened the bills one by one, the hospital invoice, the pharmacy notice, the letter from the utility company warning of disconnection. His calloused fingers rubbed his temples as he did the math. His paycheck as a driver barely kept them afloat. The late-night warehouse shifts he occasionally picked up left him exhausted, but even that wasn't enough. He looked toward the small framed photograph on the counter, his late wife, Sarah, smiling warmly as she held a much younger Emily in her arms. She had passed away 5 years ago, cancer stealing her far too soon. Since then, Michael had carried the weight of 2 parents on his shoulders. He whispered to the photo, as he sometimes did, "I'm doing my best, Sarah. I hope it's enough." The next morning began early, as always. Michael slipped into his uniform before dawn, careful not to wake Emily. He brewed a pot of cheap coffee and grabbed a bagel on the go. As he locked the door behind him, he paused briefly to glance at the mailbox stuffed with envelopes he couldn't afford to open yet. Then he walked to the bus stop. His old pickup truck sat in the driveway, broken down months ago, too costly to repair. Now, he took the bus into the city before picking up Ethan's car at the garage. On the bus, he sat quietly among other working-class commuters, nurses in scrubs, construction workers with lunch boxes, janitors rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their faces mirrored his own, tired but determined. Each carried a silent story, hidden sacrifices, private battles. By the time Michael slid behind the wheel of Ethan's Cadillac later that morning, he was once again the invisible man. The car gleamed, spotless, the leather smelling faintly of polish. Ethan climbed in, speaking briskly into his phone without even glancing at Michael. It was as though Michael ceased to exist the moment the door closed. Yet invisibility can sometimes be a shield. Michael let Ethan's curt tone wash over him, focusing instead on the rhythm of the road. He took pride in the small details, keeping the car perfectly maintained, navigating the fastest routes, ensuring Ethan was never late. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And for Michael, honest work meant survival. Still, a flicker of quiet resentment sometimes stirred inside him. He thought about the hours he spent making Ethan's life easier, while his own life teetered on the edge of collapse. Ethan had no idea that the man driving him home at night often skipped dinner so his daughter could eat, or that the reason Michael's hands trembled slightly was from exhaustion after working 2 jobs. But Michael never let those feelings show. His dignity was the one thing poverty couldn't take from him. That evening, as he returned home once more, Emily greeted him with a wide grin. "Guess what? I got an A on my history project," she announced, holding up the graded paper proudly. Michael's eyes welled with tears. He quickly blinked away. "That's amazing, Em. I'm so proud of you." In that moment, the bills, the exhaustion, the invisibility, all of it faded. What remained was the simple, unshakable truth: he would do anything for his daughter. Even if the world never noticed his sacrifice. And certainly, Ethan Cole never did. The morning sky over Manhattan was the color of steel, heavy clouds gathering above the towering glass buildings. The city moved as it always did, fast, relentless, unforgiving. Inside one of those towers, on the 37th floor, Ethan Cole stood in his office, staring out over the skyline. His reflection glared back at him from the window, an image of wealth and power, but underneath, frustration simmered. It had been a bad week. A merger Ethan had been pursuing for 6 months had collapsed at the last minute. A major investor threatened to pull out, accusing Ethan's company of overpromising and underdelivering. And now, his board members were circling like vultures, questioning his decisions, hinting at doubts about his leadership. For a man like Ethan, whose entire identity was built on control and success, the thought of failure gnawed at him like a disease. He had built his empire on precision, on never letting weakness show. Now, every crack felt like humiliation. "Ethan, we lost another client," his assistant, Rachel, said quietly as she entered his office. "They're moving to a competitor." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He turned from the window and snatched up a folder from his desk, flipping through numbers that seemed to blur before his eyes. His temples throbbed. "Get the car ready," he snapped. "I need to get downtown for the investor meeting." Rachel hesitated, then said softly, "Michael's already waiting." Ethan grabbed his coat and stormed past her, his face a mask of cold determination, but inside, his frustration burned hot. Downstairs, Michael Harris stood at the curb beside the gleaming Escalade. He checked his watch, suppressing a yawn. He had been awake most of the night. Emily had suffered a fever, and Michael had rushed her to the emergency room. They waited for hours before the doctors assured him it was under control, adjusting her medication and sending her home near dawn. Exhausted, Michael had barely slept a wink, but he still polished the SUV that morning, making sure it shone. He couldn't afford to lose this job, not now, not ever. As Ethan emerged from the building, Michael straightened his posture, opening the car door smoothly. "Good morning, sir." Ethan grunted in reply, sliding into the back seat without eye contact. Michael closed the door carefully, took his seat at the wheel, and pulled into the busy Manhattan traffic. The ride was tense. Ethan tapped furiously at his phone, muttering under his breath. His voice rose occasionally, sharp as a blade. "I don't care what it takes, fix the numbers. We can't look weak right now." Michael kept his eyes forward, navigating through the sea of taxis and delivery trucks. His body was heavy with fatigue, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual to fight off the fog of sleeplessness. When they arrived at the investor's office downtown, Ethan slammed the door without so much as a thank you. Michael exhaled slowly, rubbing his tired eyes. He parked in a designated space and leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes just for a moment. But a moment stretched longer than he intended. When Ethan stormed back out of the building an hour later, his face thunderous from another disastrous meeting, he scanned the curb and saw no car. His chest tightened with rage. He pulled out his phone, calling Michael. The SUV came screeching around the corner minutes later. Michael jumped out quickly, apologizing as he rushed to open the door. "I'm so sorry, sir. Traffic detour." Detour?" Ethan snapped, his voice low but venomous. "You weren't here when I needed you." Michael swallowed hard. His exhaustion weighed on him, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, holding the door open. Ethan brushed past him, his anger mounting with every passing second. Inside the car, the tension grew unbearable. Ethan glared at his reflection in the dark window, feeling the sting of failure from the meeting, now compounded by what he perceived as incompetence from his driver. As they pulled into the company headquarters later that afternoon, Ethan's breaking point arrived. Michael, distracted for just a second by the buzzing of his phone, Emily's school nurse leaving a voicemail, hesitated at the curb. That hesitation, though barely noticeable, was enough for Ethan's fury to explode. "Enough!" Ethan barked, slamming the car door behind him so hard it rattled. Employees nearby turned their heads, startled by the echo of his anger. He marched around to where Michael stood, his voice loud enough to carry. "I don't pay you to make excuses. I don't pay you to be late. I don't pay you to mess up simple tasks." Ethan's words cut sharp, each one laced with humiliation. Michael's face flushed. He stood still, shoulders squared, eyes lowered in quiet dignity. "You're finished," Ethan spat. "Clean out your things. Don't come back tomorrow. In fact, don't come back at all." A hush fell over the small crowd of employees passing by. They exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. To them, Michael had always been a quiet, dependable man. Seeing him fired so publicly was unsettling. Michael didn't argue. He didn't plead. His lips pressed together, and for a moment, his eyes met Ethan's, tired, sad eyes that carried more weight than Ethan could ever imagine. Then, softly, he said, "I understand, sir." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Inside the building, Ethan stormed back to his office, still seething. Rachel followed cautiously, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Cole. Michael has been with you for years. Maybe you should." "Don't," Ethan snapped, raising a hand. "I don't have time for dead weight. Not now." Rachel's expression softened with disappointment, but she said nothing more. She knew better than to argue when Ethan's pride was wounded. Left alone, Ethan sank into his chair, his chest heaving. He told himself it was necessary. Discipline. Efficiency. If people couldn't keep up, they didn't deserve a place in his world. And yet, a strange hollowness lingered beneath the anger. He pushed it aside, convincing himself he had done the right thing. But somewhere, just across the river, Michael Harris walked slowly down the New Jersey streets, his uniform collar tugged loose, his steps heavy. The phone in his pocket buzzed again, the voicemail from Emily's school nurse. His heart clenched as he listened. Emily had fainted briefly in class. They had called for him, but he had been too busy being fired to answer. Tears blurred his vision, but he blinked them away, unwilling to let neighbors see. He forced himself upright, whispering to no one but the night air, "It'll be okay. It has to be." At that same hour, Ethan stood before the window of his office, the city spread out before him. He lifted a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid. He thought he saw his reflection smile back at him, victorious in discipline. But in truth, for the first time, a sliver of unease crept into his soul. Neither man knew it yet, but this single act, this public dismissal of a quiet driver, would soon unravel both of their lives in ways they could never predict. The morning sun spilled across the manicured lawns of Robert Harrington's sprawling estate, but inside the mansion, unease lingered in the air. Robert sat at the breakfast table, reading financial reports on his iPad. Across from him, his wife, Elaine, tried to make conversation, but his responses were clipped, distracted. She finally set down her coffee cup. "Robert," she said softly, "you've been different lately. Restless. Short-tempered. Is everything all right?" Robert forced a smile. "Just work. Expansion deals. Stockholders breathing down my neck. You know how it is." But Elaine wasn't convinced. She studied her husband, noticing the way he tapped the edge of the tablet nervously, his jaw tightening as if holding back words. In truth, Robert's unease wasn't just from work. Something about David, his driver, had been nagging at him ever since their last argument. Robert had seen the man's tired eyes, the way he seemed to carry a burden larger than his pay could explain. But Robert brushed it off. He didn't like loose ends, and David was becoming one. At the office, the weight of success later that day, Robert strode into his company headquarters in downtown Chicago, greeted by the usual buzz of assistants, executives, and interns. His office was a glass fortress, perched high above the city skyline. From here, he looked untouchable. But cracks were forming. A major deal had stalled, investors were losing patience, and rumors swirled that Harrington Industries was struggling to innovate. Robert's assistant, Mark, entered with a pile of files. "Sir, the board wants reassurance. They're requesting a full update next week." Robert waved him off impatiently. "Tell them they'll get results, not excuses." Mark hesitated. "Robert, people are talking. About you. About how you've changed. You're snapping at staff. Even the security guards feel it. Maybe you should, enough." Robert snapped, slamming his palm against the desk. The sound echoed across the glass office. "I don't need lectures on my temperament. Mark backed out, unsettled. Robert sank into his chair, staring at the city below. For the first time in years, the empire he had built felt less like a monument and more like a house of cards. David's quiet world. Meanwhile, across town, David parked the sleek black sedan outside the hospital. He had told Robert earlier he needed a personal hour, something he rarely requested. Robert had reluctantly agreed, distracted by his own problems. David hurried inside, carrying a small bag of groceries. He entered a hospital room where a young woman, his daughter, Emily, lay connected to tubes and monitors. Her face was pale but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice weak but warm. David sat beside her, placing the groceries on the bedside table. "I brought your favorite applesauce. Doctor says you need to keep your strength up." Emily smiled faintly. "You didn't have to. I know you're working long hours." David brushed a strand of hair from her face. "For you, I'll work forever." The truth was brutal. Emily had been battling leukemia for nearly 2 years. Treatments drained her family's savings, and though insurance covered some, the rest fell squarely on David's shoulders. Every paycheck mattered. Every overtime hour counted. He had swallowed his pride, chauffeuring the arrogant CEO day after day, because it kept Emily alive. As he fed her spoonfuls of applesauce, his phone buzzed, a reminder of his next pickup. He sighed. Emily noticed. "Don't be late again, Dad. You'll get in trouble." David kissed her forehead. "I don't care about trouble. I care about you." But deep down, he knew trouble was exactly what awaited him. The dinner that revealed the divide. That evening, Robert attended a lavish business dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter filled the room, and plates of truffle risotto and wagyu beef circled the table. Robert played his role, smiling, boasting about quarterly growth, projecting confidence. But as he raised a toast, his gaze drifted outside through the restaurant's tall windows. On the curb, he caught sight of David standing beside the car, his coat collar pulled up against the cold, his breath fogging in the night air. David looked worn, almost fragile. For a brief moment, Robert's toast faltered. He envied the simplicity of that man's world. No shareholders, no million-dollar stakes. Just, service. And yet, why did David look like he carried a heavier load than Robert ever had? When Robert returned to the car, he barked, "You're late pulling around. Don't let it happen again." David's jaw tightened but he said nothing, gripping the steering wheel. The ride home was silent, heavy. Robert stared out the window, but the reflection staring back looked hollow. The confrontation days later, the tension finally broke. Robert had a critical investor meeting and was already in a foul mood. David arrived 10 minutes late. Robert stormed out of the lobby, seething. "Late again? Do you have any idea what my time is worth?" Robert snapped, climbing into the back seat. David opened his mouth to explain, but Robert cut him off. "No excuses. You're supposed to be invisible, efficient, reliable. If you can't handle driving, then you don't belong in this company." The words stung, but David swallowed them. He couldn't risk losing this job. Not with Emily in the hospital. So he drove in silence, his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. Robert noticed but dismissed it as incompetence. He leaned back, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. Robert's private breaking point that night, Robert poured himself a glass of bourbon in his study, the amber liquid glowing under the lamplight. The house was quiet, too quiet. Elaine had gone to bed early, tired of his short answers and cold demeanor. Robert sat alone, staring at family photos on the shelf, his children, grown and distant, living lives that barely intersected with his own. His empire had given them wealth, but not closeness. The bourbon burned his throat. He slammed the glass down harder than intended, cracking the rim. His reflection in the fractured glass looked like a stranger. For the first time, Robert felt the loneliness of his power. He had fired dozens of employees over the years without hesitation. But something about David unsettled him. Something told him the man's silence wasn't arrogance, it was pain. Yet Robert hardened his heart. "He's just a driver," he muttered to himself. "Replaceable." But deep inside, a question lingered: then why do I feel like I'm the one being replaced? The morning after their long drive together, David sat in his glass-walled corner office on the 35th floor of his Manhattan headquarters. From this height, the city looked like a chessboard, tiny yellow cabs crawling through avenues, people rushing below, lives compressed into dots. For years, he had looked at this view as a symbol of success. But today, for the first time, he wondered, how many unseen lives existed beneath his feet, how many sacrifices hidden behind closed doors. The image of John's tired eyes from the night before lingered. For the first time, David considered that perhaps the man who sat silently in the front seat, ferrying him from meeting to gala, had a story of his own. That evening, when John drove him home, David broke his usual silence. "John," he said, his voice casual but curious, "you've been driving for me a long time. How do you manage your days? Must be exhausting." John glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, a trace of surprise flashing across his face. Rarely did his employer ever ask personal questions. "I manage, sir. Long hours, yes. But it pays the bills." "The bills," David repeated, leaning back, almost amused at how foreign the phrase felt. For him, bills were numbers on a screen, automated, invisible. For John, they seemed to be a constant battle. The next morning, David noticed something small but unusual. When John dropped him at work, his suit was slightly wrinkled, his hands trembling as though from fatigue. Out of habit, John opened the door for David with quiet dignity. But David, for the first time, noticed how old his shoes were, the soles thinning, patched carefully with glue. That image stuck with him throughout the day. Later that week, after a late business dinner, David asked John to stop by a diner in Queens on the way home. "Hungry?" David asked, shocking even himself. John hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Always, sir." The diner was nearly empty, just a few night shift workers, a young couple whispering in a booth. David, in his tailored suit, looked out of place against the neon lights and smell of fried bacon. John slid into the seat opposite him. It was the first time in years they had sat face to face, not divided by a glass partition. Over black coffee and a plate of eggs, David probed further. "You've got family?" John's eyes softened. "Yes. My wife passed away some years ago. Cancer. Since then, it's just been me and my son, Michael." His voice carried a quiet pride. "Michael's 17 now. Smart kid. Wants to be a doctor." David raised his brows. A doctor. He thought of his own son, who had dropped out of college twice, still drifting between passions. He couldn't imagine John's son carrying such ambition with so little. "Sounds like he's got a bright future," David said. John gave a faint nod, his eyes turning distant. "He does. I just hope I can give it to him." David caught something in that sentence, a weight, a hidden cost. But before he could ask more, John deflected, steering the conversation back to the city traffic and baseball. Over the following weeks, David found himself watching John more closely. He noticed the way John always carried a thermos of black coffee, never buying the expensive cups David ordered daily. He noticed how John sometimes rubbed his wrist when he thought no one was watching, as though in pain. And then one evening, as David left the office later than usual, he saw John sitting in the driver's seat with a small paperback book open on the steering wheel. It wasn't a magazine, not a thriller novel, it was a biology textbook, pages filled with diagrams of the human body. David opened the back door quietly. "Light reading?" he asked, with a hint of sarcasm. John looked startled, then sheepish. "It's my son's textbook. I try to read it, so I can help him study. He's got big exams coming up. David froze. A man who worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, still forcing his tired eyes to study medical diagrams, just so his son wouldn't feel alone in his struggle. That night, in the back of the car, David felt a strange tightness in his chest. His own father had never lifted a finger to help him study, he had been too busy building his empire. David had always believed providing money was enough. But John was showing him something different. Sacrifice wasn't only financial. It was time, energy, the very self, poured into someone else's future. One Saturday, David surprised John with a request. "Take me where you go on your day off." John blinked. "Sir. I want to see. Just, humor me." Reluctantly, John drove him out of Manhattan, across the bridge, into a quieter neighborhood of Queens. The streets were narrower, the houses smaller, paint peeling in places. Finally, they stopped in front of a modest 2-story house with a sagging porch. Inside, the living room was tidy but worn. A faded sofa. A coffee table stacked with medical books and handwritten notes. On the wall, a framed picture of John's late wife smiling beside a much younger John. And there, hunched over a desk, was Michael. His dark hair fell over his notebook, his pen moving quickly across the page. When John introduced David, the boy stood respectfully, nervous but polite. "Mr. Grant, sir. I've heard a lot about you." David looked at the boy, noticing the same tired determination in his eyes as his father's. "All good things, I hope." Michael smiled. "Mostly about your busy schedule." John chuckled softly. "That's my son. Always studying, always teasing." As they spoke, David noticed how Michael's clothes were slightly too small for his growing frame, how the lamp flickered as though struggling against a weak bulb. Yet none of it seemed to dim the boy's spirit. He spoke with a quiet confidence about his dream of going to medical school, about wanting to give back to his community. In that moment, David felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, humility. The morning after Michael dismisses Robert, he wakes up in his luxurious penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook the city skyline, but for the first time, the view feels hollow. The usual sense of control, the certainty that his money and power could buy him anything, feels oddly diminished. He replays the moment in his head, Robert's tired eyes, his resigned silence, the way he accepted the dismissal without protest. Something gnaws at him. Michael has always believed in efficiency and discipline. People who make mistakes don't deserve second chances. That's what made him a billionaire CEO. But now, alone in his apartment filled with art and expensive furniture, he feels unsettled. He grabs his phone and scrolls through old text threads with Robert. There are cheerful updates about traffic routes, polite reminders of meetings, even the occasional joke to ease the CEO's stress during a bad day. Robert had been there for him more than Michael realized. Yet, Michael fired him without listening. Later that day, Michael goes into his corporate office, a towering glass building downtown. Inside the lobby, everyone greets him with rehearsed smiles. Assistants rush to open doors, colleagues flatter him. But their attention feels superficial. During the board meeting, Michael tries to focus on quarterly reports, profit margins, and expansion strategies. Yet his mind keeps drifting back to Robert. He remembers how Robert once waited 2 extra hours outside in freezing rain just because a meeting went late, never once complaining. That evening, Michael takes out his own car to drive home. He hasn't driven in years, why would he, when Robert always handled it? As he navigates the traffic, frustration grows. The honking cars, the sudden stops, the long red lights, all of it reminds him how effortless Robert made it seem. A pang of guilt pierces him. He realizes he had treated Robert not as a human being with his own struggles, but as a background convenience. Back at home, Michael pours himself a glass of whiskey, but it doesn't bring relief. He thinks about how quiet Robert was when he got fired. No anger, no pleading, just weary acceptance. That silence feels heavier than words. Why didn't Robert defend himself? Why didn't he explain? The next day, Michael visits his mother at her retirement home in Connecticut. She notices his distracted demeanor immediately. "You look troubled," she tells him, her voice calm but piercing. He brushes it off at first, but she presses. Finally, Michael admits that he fired Robert, his driver of almost a decade. His mother frowns. "Robert drove you everywhere, didn't he?" she asks. "Yes, but he failed me," Michael replies sharply. "Or maybe you failed him," she says softly. Those words hit him harder than expected. His mother reminds him of the values his father once taught him, about loyalty, respect, and looking beyond appearances. She tells him that wealth doesn't measure the worth of a man, but the way he treats those who serve him does. Michael leaves the visit shaken. He realizes he doesn't actually know much about Robert beyond his role as a driver. Where did he live? What kind of family did he have? What burdens had he been carrying silently while showing up every day? That night, sleep evades him. For the first time, Michael feels something rare, self-doubt. The next morning, instead of heading straight to the office, Michael makes an unusual decision. He instructs his assistant to dig up Robert's employee records, not for punishment or efficiency this time, but to learn about the man he so easily cast aside. He studies the file, a modest address in Queens, emergency contact listed as a hospital. His curiosity deepens. In this moment, Michael's transformation begins. He's still a CEO, still a man of wealth and control, but cracks are forming in his arrogance. The world he thought he understood so clearly suddenly seems complicated. There's a story behind Robert's silence, and Michael feels an unexplainable pull to uncover it. This section ends with Michael standing at his penthouse window again, staring out at the city lights. But unlike before, he doesn't feel powerful. He feels small. And for the first time in years, he feels compelled to step outside of his insulated world, not for business, not for profit, but to search for truth. The following morning, Michael wakes up with an unusual determination. The restless night, his mother's words, and the hollow feeling gnawing at him have fused into something sharper, curiosity. For years, Robert had been a constant, always on time, always polite, always reliable. And yet, Michael realizes, he knows nothing about the man. Not his struggles, not his dreams, not even what he did when the shift ended. Instead of heading directly to his office, Michael takes a detour. He instructs his assistant, Linda, to fetch Robert's personnel file. At first, she hesitates. Rarely has Michael shown such personal interest in an employee. But within minutes, the file is on his desk. Michael scans through the documents: address, a small apartment in Queens. Emergency contact, a local hospital, not a family member. Employment history, long years of steady service, no disciplinary marks. Notes: Robert frequently declined overtime pay, often leaving early after late-night shifts. The details feel strange. Why a hospital as an emergency contact? Why turn down extra money when his salary was modest compared to the luxury cars he drove? Michael decides to investigate personally. After work, instead of returning to his penthouse, he drives himself, awkwardly, through the evening traffic until he reaches Queens. The neighborhood is a far cry from his glass skyscraper life. Narrow streets, small bodegas, children playing basketball on cracked pavement. He parks near the address listed on Robert's file and sits quietly in his car, scanning the building. It's an old, aging brick structure with flickering lights in the hallway windows. Michael hesitates. What exactly is he doing here? CEOs don't follow their ex-employees home. Yet something urges him forward. Inside, he finds the apartment door with Robert's name. But before he can knock, a neighbor steps out carrying groceries. She notices Michael in his tailored suit and polished shoes. He doesn't belong here. Looking for Robert? She asks cautiously. Michael nods. The woman sighs. He's at the hospital again. Queen's Medical Center. Always there, poor man. Michael thanks her and leaves, his mind whirling. At the hospital? Again. That night, he drives to Queen's Medical Center. The fluorescent lights of the building feel harsh, sterile, nothing like the polished private clinics Michael is used to. At the reception desk, he asks for Robert. The nurse looks at him suspiciously before pointing him toward the pediatric ward. Pediatric. Michael's chest tightens as he follows the signs. He finds Robert sitting by a small hospital bed. On the bed lies a little girl, no older than 8, her skin pale, her frame frail, tubes and monitors surrounding her. Robert's posture is slumped, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders, but his hand gently holds the girl's. Michael freezes in the doorway. For the first time, he sees Robert not as a driver, but as a father. The nurse notices him standing there and whispers, "That's his daughter, Emily. She's been battling a rare heart condition for years." He spends every spare moment here. A surge of realization floods Michael. The late arrivals, the occasional exhaustion, the silence when fired, all of it makes sense now. Robert wasn't lazy, careless, or disloyal. He was carrying a burden too heavy to share, splitting himself between two worlds, serving his boss by day and watching over his sick child by night. Michael feels a sharp pang of shame. How many times had Robert driven him to fancy galas, corporate parties, or vacations, while quietly worrying if his daughter was still breathing? How many times had Michael complained about being 5 minutes late, while Robert was balancing life and death in the background? Robert notices him finally. Their eyes meet. Michael expects anger, but Robert only looks tired, too tired even to resent him. "What are you doing here, sir?" Robert asks softly. Michael struggles for words. I didn't know." Robert glances at his daughter and then back at Michael. "You never asked." The words cut deep. Michael realizes it's true, he never asked, never cared to look beyond the role. To him, Robert had been invisible, a fixture in his life like the steering wheel or the leather seats. And now, standing in this sterile hospital room, Michael feels smaller than he ever has before. He quietly excuses himself, not wanting to intrude further, but as he walks back through the hospital corridors, his steps feel heavy. For the first time in decades, Michael feels guilt not as a passing inconvenience, but as a wound. That night, back in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury, Michael can't enjoy any of it. The wine tastes bitter, the silence oppressive. The image of Robert's daughter, frail yet peaceful, haunts him. He remembers Robert's silence when fired. It wasn't pride or defiance. It was simply that Robert didn't have the energy to explain his battles to a man who never cared to listen. The realization hits with brutal clarity: Michael has spent his life measuring people by usefulness, by efficiency, by results. But real worth, real humanity, doesn't fit neatly on a balance sheet. As the city glitters outside his window, Michael finally understands something he's never allowed himself to feel before. Empathy. The morning sun crept over Manhattan, but the warmth it brought couldn't reach Michael's penthouse. He sat alone at his sleek glass kitchen counter, untouched coffee cooling beside him. For the first time in years, the hum of the city outside felt distant, irrelevant. His mind was consumed with images of Robert's weary eyes, his quiet dignity, the fragile little girl tethered to hospital monitors. Michael had always believed he understood life. Money, power, status, their accumulation was the measure of success. Now he understood how naive he had been. He had measured Robert by what he did for him, not by the life he carried outside the luxurious bubble of a chauffeured car. Every scene replayed in his mind: Robert sitting silently in the hospital room, balancing hope and exhaustion, Emily's weak smile when her father brought her a simple applesauce, the way Robert's hands shook slightly when lifting the fork for her, as if each action carried a weight beyond comprehension. Michael felt a tightness in his chest, a pressure he hadn't experienced in decades. The visit by mid-morning, Michael made a decision. He couldn't just sit in his office, paralyzed by guilt. He had to see Robert, had to understand fully, had to make amends, or at the very least, offer recognition. He drove to Queens himself, the streets narrow and uneven, the city feeling different from the sanitized world of corporate Manhattan. Every stoplight, every honking cab reminded him that he was stepping out of his insulated reality. Finally, he reached Robert's small apartment. The building was old, the paint peeling, the stairs worn smooth by countless footsteps over decades. Michael's polished shoes clicked awkwardly against the concrete as he climbed. At the door, he paused, unsure if he had the right to intrude. But a resolve stronger than his hesitation pushed him to knock. The door opened slowly. Robert's eyes widened briefly in recognition. "Sir?" he asked cautiously. Michael swallowed hard. I need to apologize," he said, his voice unsteady. "I fired you without knowing everything. I should have known." Robert studied him silently. There was no triumph in his gaze, no malice, just the quiet endurance of someone who had faced far greater storms. Michael stepped inside, and Robert gently closed the door behind him. The apartment was modest, a small sofa, a dining table cluttered with textbooks and notes, a single lamp casting warm light across the room. And there, lying peacefully on the bed, was Emily. Michael felt the room constrict as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. He had witnessed poverty and wealth side by side many times in his life, but he had never seen sacrifice and love measured so purely. The conversation. Michael sat down, struggling to find words. "I had no idea." Robert shook his head slightly. "You never asked." "That's all," he said softly. "I've been managing my life and my daughter's care while doing my job. I've never needed approval. Just understanding." Michael's throat tightened. You've been carrying all this while making sure I got to my meetings on time, that my schedule ran smoothly, my car always ready, and his voice faltered. "You thought I was just a driver," Robert said, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "But I was more than that, and I didn't need your recognition to know my value." Michael felt the weight of his ignorance crash over him. All the times he complained about being 5 minutes late, all the times he criticized minor mistakes, all the times he assumed loyalty was given without thought, he saw it for what it was, arrogance. He had been blind to humanity. The apology. Michael finally found his voice. "Robert, I fired you. Publicly. Without understanding a single thing about your life. I can't undo that, but I need you to know I was wrong. I'm sorry." Robert didn't respond immediately. He looked at Emily, then back at Michael. "It wasn't easy, sir," he said quietly. "But you didn't know. And that makes a difference." Michael felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never cried in front of an employee. In his world, tears were weakness. But now, standing in this humble apartment, surrounded by real struggle, real love, he allowed himself to feel. The moral revelation. Over the next hour, Michael learned the details of Robert's life, the sleepless nights in the hospital, the constant worry about bills, the sacrifices he made to ensure Emily could have the best care possible, the resilience and quiet dignity with which he carried burdens Michael had never imagined. He realized something profound: life wasn't about wealth or power, it was about what you give when nobody is watching. Robert's world, though humble, was rich in ways Michael's skyscrapers and bank accounts could never replicate. Every story Michael heard, from the nights spent at Emily's bedside to the hours John spent researching treatments, explaining biology concepts to his daughter, and working overtime at jobs he could have walked away from, layered another level of shame and awe. Michael understood that he had measured worth incorrectly, had assumed life was transactional, when in reality, humanity was relational. The turning point. Before leaving, Michael asked Robert if he could do anything to help. Robert shook his head. "I don't need charity, sir. Just respect. And maybe understanding from the world you live in. That's enough." Michael nodded slowly, realizing that real change began not with money, but with humility. He had been given a rare opportunity to confront his mistakes and learn the value of sacrifice, loyalty, and compassion firsthand. As he drove back to Manhattan, the skyline no longer seemed like a monument to power. It felt fragile, distant. His penthouse no longer represented invincibility, it was simply a place where he had learned the depth of human resilience. That night, Michael wrote a personal letter to Robert, apologizing again, promising to ensure his daughter would have whatever she needed for her treatment, and pledging that no one would ever underestimate Robert's dedication and sacrifice again. The following morning, Michael awoke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. The city skyline, which usually symbolized power and control, now represented an opportunity to right a wrong and restore what he had so carelessly broken. He made a decision. Today, he would see Robert not as a driver, not as an employee, but as a man who had given everything he had for love and family. Michael's limousine waited outside, but he declined it. Instead, he drove himself through the city streets, feeling the pulse of life around him in a way he had never allowed himself to before. Every honking horn, every street vendor, every pedestrian rushing along sidewalks reminded him of a world he had ignored, a world of struggles, sacrifices, and human resilience. The gesture he arrived at Robert's small apartment in Queens, carrying a gift he had spent the night preparing, a carefully chosen package of essentials and a card. More than wealth, he wanted it to convey respect, recognition, and understanding. He knocked gently, heart pounding with anticipation and uncertainty. Robert opened the door. His eyes widened briefly in surprise. He wasn't expecting anyone from the towering world of Manhattan to cross into his neighborhood so personally. "Sir?" Robert asked, cautious but curious. Michael stepped forward. "Robert, he paused, struggling to find words worthy of what he felt. "I can't undo what I did. I know I've been blind. I can only offer this, and ask for your forgiveness. I want to make things right." Robert's gaze softened, though the exhaustion and stress in his face were still visible. I don't need anything, sir. You don't owe me anything." Michael shook his head firmly. "No, I do. I owe you recognition. I owe you respect. And I owe it to Emily to ensure she gets everything she needs for her treatment. Please, let me help." For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy and charged with unspoken truths. Finally, Robert nodded, the weight of trust slowly returning to his posture. Meeting Emily, Michael's eyes followed Robert as he guided him to Emily's room. The little girl, still frail but alert, looked up at Michael with curiosity. "Hello," she whispered softly. Michael knelt beside her, unsure how to speak. "Hi, Emily. I'm Michael. I want to apologize for not understanding your dad sooner." Emily's eyes widened, and a small, tentative smile appeared. Robert squeezed her hand gently. "She's strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than most adults I know." Michael nodded. He realized that this was not just about him or Robert, it was about witnessing courage and love in its purest form. Emily's resilience, nurtured by her father's unwavering devotion, was a living testament to the sacrifices he had made quietly for years. Corporate and personal transformation. Over the following weeks, Michael made changes in both his personal and professional life. In the office, he implemented policies to ensure that employees were seen, valued, and understood, not just measured by efficiency or output. He encouraged managers to recognize the human stories behind every role, fostering a culture of respect and empathy. Privately, he worked to restore his relationship with Robert, no longer treating him as a subordinate but as a partner in responsibility and trust. He personally ensured Emily received the best care possible, coordinating with doctors, scheduling appointments, and arranging for flexible hours for Robert to be present with his daughter when needed. At home, Michael also reflected on his own family. His children, distant and distracted by their own pursuits, became the focus of attention he had once reserved only for profit margins. He learned that love, presence, and understanding were more powerful than money, more enduring than status. The power of recognition. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Robert returned home to find Michael waiting at the doorstep with a small bouquet of flowers for Emily and a few personal gifts. Robert's eyes filled with surprise. "Michael, you didn't have to," he said quietly. Michael smiled warmly. "I wanted to. Not because I have to, but because I finally understand what you've carried all these years. You've given everything to your daughter, and it's time someone honored that." For the first time, Robert allowed himself to feel unburdened by shame or obligation. The simple gestures of acknowledgement, the understanding, the empathy, the respect, meant more than any monetary compensation. Emily looked up at Michael, her fragile smile now full of warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael knelt beside her, gently holding her hand. "No, Emily. Thank you. You've taught me more about courage and love than I ever knew possible." Emotional climax. The transformation was not instantaneous, but gradual. Michael felt his arrogance dissolve into humility, his power tempered by understanding. Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders, no longer needing to carry the burden of silence and invisibility. Emily's laughter, once rare and tentative, filled the small apartment with light, a testament to resilience and familial devotion. The emotional high reached its peak when Michael invited Robert and Emily to a private dinner at a modest but carefully chosen restaurant in Manhattan. No corporate fanfare, no cameras, just a simple meal, conversation, and shared understanding. Michael spoke openly about his mistakes, about the arrogance that blinded him, about the humility he had learned. Robert shared stories of Emily's small victories, her courage during treatments, her determination to succeed, her love for books and learning. Michael listened, laughed, and sometimes choked up, understanding for the first time what it truly meant to witness sacrifice and love firsthand. The moral resolution. By the end of the evening, both men understood each other in a way that transcended their professional roles. Michael realized that true leadership was not about control or authority, but about empathy, recognition, and moral integrity. Robert understood that his sacrifices were finally seen and honored, not just as obligations, but as acts of love and courage that inspired change in someone who had once been blind. The final scene is Michael and Robert standing outside the restaurant, watching Emily play quietly nearby. The city lights twinkle behind them, but the real illumination comes from the human connection they've rebuilt. Michael offers Robert a handshake, which Robert converts into a warm, brotherly embrace. The act is symbolic, past grievances reconciled, respect restored, and lessons learned. The weeks following Michael's reconciliation with Robert were quiet but profound. The city moved around them as usual, honking taxis, hurried pedestrians, the soft hum of subway trains beneath the streets, but within their lives, a transformation had taken place that no skyscraper, stock chart, or corner office could measure. Michael had discovered the invisible threads that connected people, the sacrifices that often went unnoticed, and the power of empathy as a force stronger than authority or wealth. New beginnings. Michael started his day in ways he never had before. Instead of checking profit margins first, he reached out to employees across the company to understand their lives beyond their roles. He implemented a Human Stories initiative, where staff could share personal journeys, struggles, and triumphs anonymously, ensuring the workplace celebrated humanity, not just efficiency. The CEO, who had once been distant and untouchable, now wrote handwritten notes of encouragement, occasionally stopping by departments to greet people personally. In his personal life, Michael made regular visits to Queens, joining Robert and Emily for small dinners, helping out with errands, attending school events, and even coaching Emily through homework. Each act was simple, yet it carried enormous weight. It was the realization that real influence came not from commanding from above, but from standing beside those who needed support. Emily's health gradually stabilized thanks to both medical care and the emotional support her father and Michael provided. Michael occasionally accompanied them to doctor's appointments, listening to Emily's laughter and marveling at the resilience she carried despite her struggles. Her victories, small milestones like completing a science project, finishing a book, or simply laughing freely after a long hospital stay, became celebrations for all three of them. Michael, who had spent his life chasing tangible successes, began to understand the immeasurable value of these personal triumphs. Robert, too, experienced a shift. The constant weight of silent sacrifice lightened as he realized his dedication had been recognized, his struggles validated. His pride no longer forced him into invisibility, he could accept help without feeling diminished. Corporate transformation. The change Michael implemented at work rippled throughout the company. Policies emphasizing empathy and understanding replaced the rigid, efficiency-only mindset. Managers were encouraged to check in on employees' well-being, to recognize dedication beyond mere numbers, and to foster collaboration and emotional support. Employees felt seen and appreciated, which increased morale, loyalty, and productivity. What had begun as Michael's personal awakening now shaped the culture of an entire organization. Staff who once feared the distant CEO now admired him, not just for his success, but for his ability to learn, grow, and prioritize people over profit. Michael also introduced scholarships and support programs for children of employees who faced hardships, directly inspired by Emily's courage. These initiatives bridged the gap between wealth and community, illustrating a tangible moral lesson: giving back transforms lives beyond monetary exchange. The bond between Michael and Robert. Over time, Michael and Robert's relationship evolved into one of mutual respect and friendship. No longer confined to a formal employer-employee dynamic, they shared insights about life, business, and personal growth. Michael learned patience, humility, and the art of listening without judgment. Robert gained a newfound confidence in accepting recognition, realizing that sacrifice does not diminish a person, and sometimes even the powerful can grow through empathy. One afternoon, Robert shared a quiet moment with Michael in the park. Emily ran ahead, laughing as she played on the swings. The two men sat on a bench, watching her, letting the city hum around them. "You know," Robert said, "I never expected any of this. I never imagined that someone like you would care beyond the surface." Michael nodded. "I never expected to learn so much about life from someone I used to overlook. You taught me humility, patience, and what true dedication looks like." They shared a quiet smile, an understanding that words alone could never capture. This bond, born from empathy and acknowledgement, was a lasting legacy far beyond any business deal or financial success. Community impact. Michael's change did not stop within his office or immediate circle. He began participating in community programs, supporting local schools, hospitals, and social initiatives. Stories of his personal awakening, how he came to understand Robert's sacrifices, became a source of inspiration. People across the city and the country admired his journey. The man who had once ruled with arrogance now led with compassion. The narrative of wealth balanced with humility resonated deeply with audiences who valued family, community, and moral integrity. His actions reminded them that no amount of power could replace human connection, and that the smallest gestures of recognition could ripple outward, transforming lives in unexpected ways. Michael's reflection. One evening, after a particularly quiet day, Michael returned to his penthouse. He stood by the window, gazing at the city lights, reflecting on the journey that began with a simple, unnoticed driver. He thought about all the people he had overlooked, the lessons he had ignored, and the moments of genuine humanity he had once dismissed. Now, he understood that the most profound achievements were not counted in dollars or accolades, but in empathy, understanding, and the lives one touched meaningfully. Michael realized that his legacy, previously measured in buildings and bank statements, would now be measured in relationships, human impact, and moral courage. He had learned that true power came not from dominating others, but from recognizing and honoring the sacrifices and humanity of those around him. Emily's perspective. Emily, now slightly healthier and stronger, sensed the change too. She smiled freely when Michael visited, no longer cautious or reserved. She didn't just see a wealthy man, she saw someone who had learned to care deeply, someone who had transformed because of her father's unwavering dedication. The audience witnesses her innocence and resilience as a mirror for all the sacrifices made silently by parents everywhere. Her laughter, her small triumphs, and the nurturing support from both Robert and Michael serve as symbols of hope, inspiration, and the enduring power of compassion. Closing emotional beat. The story closes with a montage of scenes, Michael and Robert sharing coffee on a quiet morning. Emily completing her science project, beaming with pride. The office celebrating small employee achievements, laughter echoing in the hallways. Michael walking through Queens, helping neighbors and participating in community initiatives. Months had passed since Michael's awakening, and the once intimidating CEO had begun to embody a new philosophy, one that balanced ambition with humanity. His transformation was no longer private, it was visible, felt by colleagues, friends, and even strangers who came across his story. The lesson was clear: true leadership, true influence, came not from wealth, titles, or power, but from empathy, understanding, and moral courage. The ripple effect. Michael's changes in corporate culture had a ripple effect throughout the company. Employees, who once measured success solely by numbers and efficiency, now felt valued as human beings. Recognition programs highlighted acts of kindness, dedication, and personal triumphs, while mentorship initiatives encouraged experienced staff to guide and support younger employees in balancing work and personal lives. In team meetings, Michael no longer spoke only about profits, he shared stories, sometimes his own, sometimes employees', to emphasize the human element behind every decision. Employees began to trust him in a way they never had before. They were inspired not just by his wealth, but by his humility and willingness to learn from mistakes. Robert's continued sacrifice. Robert continued to care for Emily with unwavering dedication, but now he did so with dignity and acknowledgement. No longer invisible, his quiet sacrifices were recognized and supported. Michael ensured Emily had access to the best healthcare, educational resources, and emotional support, but always with sensitivity, never overshadowing Robert's role as a father. The community around them began to notice the difference too. Neighbors, friends, and co-workers saw that small gestures of recognition, respect, and support could transform lives. Robert's story became a quiet inspiration, a reminder that heroism often exists in the unseen, daily acts of love and devotion. Michael's public acknowledgement. One afternoon, Michael organized a small gathering at the company headquarters, inviting Robert, Emily, and close staff. Without pomp or ceremony, he publicly acknowledged Robert's unwavering commitment over the years. Today, Michael began, voice steady and sincere, I want to recognize someone who has taught me more about humanity, sacrifice, and love than I could have ever learned in any boardroom or luxury office. Robert has carried responsibilities and burdens most of us could never imagine. He has shown dedication not because he had to, but because he loved, and in doing so, he has reminded us all what it means to truly care. Applause filled the room, genuine and heartfelt. Robert, usually reserved, allowed a small, proud smile. Emily clapped, her laughter a soft echo of innocence and resilience. Inspiring change beyond the company. Michael's story spread beyond the office walls. Articles, interviews, and social media posts highlighted his journey from arrogance to empathy, emphasizing the hidden sacrifices of everyday heroes like Robert. Viewers and readers across the country resonated with the tale, parents caring for sick children, employees silently balancing work and family, people whose quiet dedication often went unnoticed. In the broader community, people began to act. Small gestures, helping neighbors, supporting local workers, recognizing silent heroes, multiplied. Michael's awakening became a model for modern leadership, a reminder that wealth and power carry responsibility, not only in business but in humanity. Family and community. Back in Queens, the trio, Michael, Robert, and Emily, continued to grow together. Weekends were spent attending school events, community gatherings, and volunteer activities. Michael's children, inspired by their father's transformation, began to engage with the world beyond privilege, learning the importance of compassion, responsibility, and recognition of unseen struggles. Even in casual settings, Michael encouraged conversations about empathy and moral responsibility. Simple acts, like helping an elderly neighbor with groceries or attending a local fundraiser, became lessons for the next generation. The narrative reinforced the core message: true wealth is measured by human connection and the impact one has on others. Emily's voice. Emily, now stronger and healthier, occasionally spoke publicly about her experiences, not seeking attention, but offering perspective. She shared how her father's dedication and the support from Michael changed her life, giving hope to families in similar situations. Her small voice, full of sincerity, reminded everyone that heroes exist in ordinary lives, in the care of parents, the understanding of neighbors, and the recognition by those in positions of power. Michael learned that influence was most meaningful when it empowered others and amplified human goodness rather than his own status. The city of New York sparkled beneath the late afternoon sun, but for Michael, the skyline no longer symbolized power or wealth, it symbolized growth, understanding, and connection. Years of ambition and achievement had once defined him, but now the true measure of his life lay in human bonds, empathy, and the impact he had on others. Michael had transformed, not through an executive decision or a profitable deal, but through humility, reflection, and recognition of a man he once overlooked. Robert's quiet sacrifice and Emily's courage had opened his eyes to what truly mattered: love, devotion, and moral courage. A new normal life settled into a new rhythm. Michael continued to lead his company, but the focus shifted from domination and efficiency to empathy and human-centered leadership. Board meetings incorporated stories from employees, highlighting dedication, struggle, and resilience. Staff meetings began with brief acknowledgments of personal achievements, fostering a culture of mutual respect and understanding. In Queens, Robert's world was no longer one of quiet struggle. With Michael's support, Emily received consistent medical care, tutoring, and opportunities to explore her talents. Their modest apartment, once defined by stress and uncertainty, now radiated warmth, love, and hope. Michael made frequent visits, not as a benefactor, but as a friend and mentor. He shared meals, attended parent-teacher conferences, and even helped Emily with her science projects. These moments were small, intimate, and transformative, evidence that genuine care mattered far more than grand gestures. Personal reflection. One evening, Michael sat on a park bench overlooking the city. The streets were alive with people hurrying home from work, children playing, neighbors greeting each other. He reflected on his journey, the arrogance that once clouded his judgment, the decisions made in ignorance, the silent sacrifices he had overlooked. He thought of Robert's resilience, Emily's courage, and his own awakening. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the profound weight of recognition and gratitude. Michael realized that power without empathy is hollow, and success without understanding is meaningless. For the first time in his life, he felt truly accomplished, not in wealth or prestige, but in human connection and moral clarity. He understood that the most enduring legacy is not measured in skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in the lives touched, the support offered, and the respect given. Community engagement. Michael's transformation extended beyond his personal and corporate life. He became actively involved in community programs, supporting local schools, hospitals, and mentorship initiatives. He shared his story at events, not to boast, but to inspire others to recognize the sacrifices around them and to act with empathy. Robert became a respected figure in these circles as well, his story of quiet devotion resonating with countless parents and caregivers. Emily's resilience inspired educational programs for children facing medical challenges, reinforcing the idea that even small victories can transform lives when nurtured with love and support. Together, the trio, Michael, Robert, and Emily, symbolized the power of recognition, compassion, and moral courage. They demonstrated that one act of empathy could ripple outward, creating positive change far beyond its initial reach. The final transformation. Michael's life had been irrevocably changed. He no longer viewed employees, neighbors, or strangers as means to an end. Every interaction became an opportunity for understanding and respect. He listened more, judged less, and acted with awareness of the human stories unfolding around him. Robert, once silently burdened, now carried dignity and acknowledgement alongside his responsibilities. The quiet strength that had defined him remained, but it was reinforced by the support and recognition he had long deserved. Emily thrived in this new environment of love and attention. Her laughter filled apartments and streets, a reminder that courage and resilience are nurtured in environments of understanding and care. The story of a sick child and a devoted father had inspired a billionaire CEO to transform his values, proving that even the smallest acts of love could lead to monumental change. The emotional climax. The epilogue reaches its emotional peak as Michael, Robert, and Emily stand together on a hill overlooking the city at sunset. The warm golden light washes over them, painting the skyline with a sense of possibility and hope. Michael takes a deep breath, looking at Robert with newfound respect. "You've taught me more about life than I could ever learn in a boardroom," he says softly. Robert smiles. "We all have lessons to give. Sometimes it just takes someone willing to see them." Emily tugs at Michael's hand, her laughter light and joyous. "Let's go, Daddy. Let's play before the sun goes down." Michael and Robert watch as she runs ahead, the simplicity of her joy highlighting the profound truth they have both learned: life is about presence, care, and the quiet acts that truly define humanity. Moral closure. The story concludes with a powerful moral resolution: true wealth is measured in empathy, moral courage, and human connection, not money or power. Recognition and appreciation of unseen sacrifices can transform lives. Leadership and influence are most meaningful when rooted in understanding, humility, and support for others. Acts of kindness, respect, and acknowledgement ripple outward, creating enduring change far beyond the immediate context. The audience, especially family-focused viewers, is left with catharsis and inspiration, a reminder that even in a world driven by ambition and material success, the simplest acts of humanity can redefine lives, bridge divides, and leave lasting legacies. Cinematic closure. The final scenes are visually and emotionally cinematic, Emily running freely in the park, laughing as the sun sets. Robert watching proudly, finally at ease. Michael standing beside them, transformed, reflective, and humbled by the journey. The city skyline behind them glows with a warm, golden hue, symbolic of hope, growth, and the enduring power of human compassion. A soft musical score rises, carrying the weight of lessons learned and the joy of redemption. The camera pans outward, leaving the trio small against the vast city, yet monumental in the lives they have touched and the change they represent.